received national attention, allowed us to push forward for the first time in many years to be able to get to a stage where the government is now allowing very limited prescriptions by specialists for a very limited range of cannabis-based oils. And I think the phrase is very limited, yeah? To be clear, it is limited. But that is a door that has been opened. And clearly there is a public narrative that has been won that cannabis and cannabis derivatives should be seen as having medical properties. And that is the first stage. Because in most fights, you go stage by stage, you don't achieve the whole cake at once. And that door has been opened. And now let's be very clear what has been agreed. It is not still that you will get any cannabis derivatives on open prescription from your general practitioner. You will get it from a specialist or a consultant only. So already there is a burden and a barrier there that will prevent the vast majority of people being able to access medical cannabis. And it is only with certain cannabis oils and cannabis derivatives. Now, very interestingly, of course, the biggest synthetic cannabis that is used in the NHS is produced by the husband of the current drugs minister in this country. And so one might argue that there is a financial interest for her not to open up the market to other forms of medical cannabis, or to allow people to grow themselves, because it would destroy her husband's monopoly that he currently has with is it
British.
Sativex.
Sativex.
Yes.
Sativex.
Sativex. Thank you very much. So.
How did he get his license to grow?
Well, the minister had to approve it. He is. I think it was another minister at the time that approved it, to be fair, but she does keep renewing it to make sure her husband continues to get renewals. Anyway, putting that mild corruption aside, is the Conservative Party just normal day-to-day course of action? The reality is that we have got a glimmer of hope of other oils being made available. The next step clearly needs to be to allow GPs, your general practitioner, to be able to prescribe a much wider range of cannabis oils and a much wider range of cannabinoids. And that's what we need to, I would argue, to achieve. Now, it might well be that next year some good cases come forward that we're able to showcase and highlight, and we achieve complete success for that. The reality is it might well be 2 or 3 years down the line, or even longer. So that's why a continued push, continued evidence-based, continued surveys are so important, because it keeps the pressure up. It means the issue is not dropped off the agenda. Now, Antonia, my fellow MP, Labour MP for Wales, is doing a lot of work pushing this. She has taken up the mantle for Paul Lynn, who had been pushing this, and I would say that she is a very good face for this issue. And again, the face and the person matters in politics. She is a kind of a mother, a young mother, someone who is kind of seen as a caring person, and that is kind of the MP that you need to be pushing this. And we will support and rally behind her when needed, and we will continue to push. Now, there is a second prong, which is the general discussion about how we treat regulated and illegal drugs in this country. And that is a question about how we continue to criminalise the use of drugs. Now, whether you believe that drugs should be permitted for use recreationally, or for medically, or whatever, if people misuse them, to some extent, there needs to be some sort of restriction on the misuse of them. Restriction on the misuse of alcohol, the restriction on the misuse of any kind of drug. The question is, for some drugs at the moment, we restrict the misuse of them by criminalising people. And what that does is not actually reduce the misuse, it doesn't actually reduce the harm, it increases the harm, and it leads to communities being forced into the black market. And so there is a wider push that we need to get, and a discussion that we're having in the Labour Party, because we're not there yet in the Labour Party, let me be honest, about making sure that we move towards an almost complete decriminalisation of personal use. And I'm not saying decriminalisation of supply, but decriminalisation of personal use of probably almost all drugs. And that push needs to happen not because I support the use of drugs in a reckless way, in an abusive way, but it needs to happen because the only way that you stop the misuse of drugs is to support people into in a medical way. Just as if people are misusing alcohol, you need to support them in a medical way to have a sensible relationship with alcohol. If people are misusing any form of drugs, there needs to be support for them to use them in a sensible way. And that support needs to be done medically. And what we've seen in Portugal and parts of Spain, where that approach has been taken, harm has reduced. And so that is also, and of course, you reduce the burden from the criminal justice system. So that is the second prong. There's the medical prong, but there's also the criminal justice prong. And talking about how we need to make sure that we actually get to a stage where whatever the laws are around any form of drug classification, when people breach those laws for whatever reason, you are not suddenly locking them up or giving them a criminal record or potentially making them lose their jobs, potentially causing greater costs to the taxpayer. You are saying, how can we support people into using things in a sensible and harm-reducing way? And that argument, I think, we are going to get some success on in the Labour Party. That argument, I think, is very much backed up by evidence, where we've seen globally. And actually, that argument, more generally, is getting support from communities that are blighted by the misuse of drugs. And let's be honest, we're not really talking about the misuse of cannabis, we're talking about the misuse of much harder drugs, which happens in our streets. And I put forward a bill to allow drug consumption rooms in this country, which are currently banned, which allow a medical approach to support of injectable drugs. And very interestingly, I went along to a meeting in Bristol Estate, in Cranevale Estate and Baker's Bottom in Brighton, if anyone knows where that is. And it was all about drug dealing and I went along thinking, oh goodness, this is going to be a tough ride. They're just going to be asking the police to move people on, and it's going to be the usual community. By the end of the meeting, people were saying, no, we don't just want the police crackdown, because it will just push it somewhere else. It won't actually help these people. This is the residents. These are residents of a council estate. They're saying, no, we want places for people to be able to be supported to use these drugs safely. We want them to be supported to be able to use safer drugs or to use them. And actually, they started a petition in their estate to allow the government a change of law for that. So I think what you're seeing is a groundswell in communities as well, that they actually realise the drugs policy of Britain is broken. And it doesn't work. It doesn't work to help make communities safer. And that's what our drugs policy must be. So there's the medical line and there's the criminal line that I think we will make successes on in the coming years. Now, as I said at the beginning, this year we had 2 photogenic children that were able to head the campaign and head the parliamentary campaign, to be honest, the parliamentary activity. Getting that again might not be what happens, but what we need to do is present common sense examples to the public. The kind of examples where actually they don't come along very often, because most of us are flawed human beings, and the problem with flawed human beings is we have baggage that comes along with us that means that many of us wouldn't be the perfect role model to put up there. But we need to find another set of people that we can put up there that actually have almost an untarnished history, but on this one issue need to use medical cannabis, a variety of cannabinoids, in a way that going to a consultant restricts them and prevents them from accessing it, to be the next push. And finding that person, I hope, will come sooner than later. And when we do, I hope we will have a set of parliamentarians that will be ready to take up the mantle for you. And your engagement with MPs is really important in that sense. To present that softly spoken, gentle approach to your MPs, to make sure they are on board, so that when it comes around again, particularly Conservative MPs, I would suggest, I mean, you've got the Liberal Party conference here this week, and I suspect a lot of those MPs are very much on board. You have a bulk of Labour MPs that are very much on board. You have some Labour MPs that need convincing because they are worried about the harm in their community on illegal drugs. And we need to convince them actually approach of medical and an approach of decriminalisation will actually help their communities, not harm their communities. And then they will come on board as well. And then we need to persuade Conservatives because they have the majority in the House of Commons. And that's how the progress has been made so far. Look, that is where we are. That is where I would suspect, from a parliamentary perspective,